So today I'm giving the sermon or the homily or the message, and I've titled it, "What Will Our Resurrection Be?" This is the bright time of the year. The spring equinox was on March 15th, where the day was the same length as the night. And from that day until the fall equinox, the days will be longer than the nights. And it's the time of spring's return, the joyful time, the seed time, when life bursts forth from the earth and the chains of winter are broken. Many pagans call this day Ostara, which is the name of the Germanic goddess of the spring. It's also the origin of the name of the Christian holiday, Easter. Some parts of the popular holiday of Easter, like eggs and the Easter bunny, come from pagan traditions. In the Christian tradition, this is the season of Christ's resurrection, which Christians are celebrating today. The celebration of the miracle story of when Jesus was found to have resurrected from the tomb. All around us, nature is experiencing a resurrection as well. In the pagan tradition, there are many stories of dying and rising gods and goddesses, like the story of Ishtar and Tammuz from earlier. This is a time when we celebrate the triumph of the god of the sun over his dark twin and the powers of darkness. It's a time that we celebrate the return of the spring goddess from the underworld. This day is also called Lady Day in the British Isles. It is the day farmers first go out to their fields. For pagans, this is a day for honoring not only the goddess, but also her lover, the god, for spring is about new life. The chant we heard, Frey and Freya, which are the names of the Norse god and goddess of fertility. They mean Lord and Lady, so some call this day Lord and Lady Day to honor both the god and the goddesses. It certainly feels like we are in a time of darkness now, doesn't it? What will be the light to rise from this? What can we do to cultivate that rebirth? A colleague of mine, Lenore Bajar Dukes, spoke recently about Easter with a radical friend who was a Mennonite. I found some solace in the elements of their analysis that might be helpful to all of us now, and I wanted to share it with you. Let's consider the extremity of the Roman Empire sentencing Jesus and choosing crucifixion as the means of execution. This dishonorable death is the pinnacle of humiliation and violation of dignity. He's further criminalized by his manner of death. Now, Jesus was no civil angel. He'd been trotting around town, flipping tables and challenging authority in a number of ways. But it was his message that was the real threat to the Roman Empire, his wild and radical message of love. Love that transformed, that insisted that all people in society belonged, that shamed oppression through acts of peace and inclusion. This love was warmly felt amongst the marginalized in the Jewish community, and even those beyond. Many came to hear his message. The Roman Empire saw no other way to protect themselves and their allies than to end this wild madness of acceptance and put Jesus to death and thus kill the movement. It is finished, dead, gone. After the Sabbath, when the women came to the tomb to wash and wrap his body, a final farewell act of love, honor, and mourning, they find an empty tomb, a final indignity. Someone had robbed the tomb, violated his body and spirit. This transgression has parallels for me to the body of Michael Brown lying in the streets for hours, witnessing the inhumanity of the establishment and what that does to a person, to a people. This final act of violence towards Jesus' movement of love was interpreted as a glorious return of his physical body to heaven, the utmost sign of honor to his body. Jesus' dignity was restored, his movement flourished, and the story spread. The empire couldn't kill him forever. Their violence couldn't retain their power. For violence has limits that cannot withstand the power of love, life, and human kindness. Even in the midst of grief, even after that violence has seemingly taken everything, even after the resurrection still took Jesus from his disciples as they grieved their separation, the story changed. The story of who he was, of his death, of what the empire had done to their beloved leader was forever changed. That was the transformation, the resurrection, the rise of new life. The message from the Christian story of Easter has a special resonance this year. The inability to honor the physical body and yet see love persist is very poignant as we face this crisis. Many are ill and dying, separated from family, from loved ones. Funerals are being postponed or foregone. Hastily constructed morgues and massed graves are needed to account for the staggering number of people dying alone. Their loved ones being denied a chance to offer the final acts of care and mourning that we are accustomed to. And yet, there is an overwhelming message being shared through our communities from all levels of life that love and humanity persists. The needs of the most vulnerable in our society are being centered and honored, despite the physical distance, despite the empty tomb. This time of the seasons, we celebrate green life surging upward from the dark earth, just as Persephone returned to the arms of her mother Demeter from the dark underworld where she had been kidnapped by Hades. Just as the goddess Ishtar rose from the underworld with Tammuz, who she had rescued from the queen of darkness. Just as Jesus rose from his grave and ascended into heaven, the darkness of his death being turned into light. Just as the injustice and inhumanity surrounding the death of Michael Brown became the nationwide campaign Black Lives Matter. Let us lead the rise of our society, the resurrection of compassion and community from the darkness of capitalism into a new era, a green era, with compassion and community. We are disciples of love and hope. What will our resurrection be?